Hello, my name is Connor Tate, and this is my project. Introducing Yourself to the World, National Identity in Sub-Saharan Africa through the Lens of Vexillology. That is, the study and design of flags. Suppose you're one of the leaders of a decolonization movement, and you've just succeeded in your goal of gaining independence for your country. Congratulations! Now, however, you face a task at least as hard as obtaining freedom: building a nation. In order to establish a shared identity for people to rally behind, you need symbols. You need things that represent the shared identity as the people of your country and as Africans which you're trying to build. You need an image that, when someone asks, "What are you?" or for that matter, "What are we?" you can point to and say, "That's what we are." You need a flag. Look at the flags of Africa for a moment. Think about what you see. Pause the video if you need to. Right? So, what are the similarities that you notice? What stands out as different? Every flag has meaning, intention behind its design. If a flag has some trait that another flag doesn't, there's a reason for that. If two flags look similar, there's often a good reason for that too. What can a flag tell you about the people it's supposed to represent? This is a question that applies to every flag, everywhere in the world, but there's only one continent where we've seen this huge profusion of what you could argue are new national identities, and thus national flags, within the past century. And that, of course, is Africa. So, the first thing that should stand out about the flags of modern Africa is that most of them use at least two of four different colors: red, green, yellow, and black. And all of these have a particular significance to the history of decolonization in Africa. Ethiopia was the only sub-Saharan African country that was never colonized, making them a fact which, is important to a lot of people. And it happens that their traditional colors are green, yellow, and red. So those colors sort of associated with a particular ideal. Red, black, and green, meanwhile, are the colors of the Pan-African flag. And I can't get it to... So, let's talk about the Pan-African flag. It was originally designed in 1920 by Marcus Garvey, a political activist from Jamaica whose work is fairly interesting but also beyond the scope of this class. And Garvey essentially believed that in order to unite against their oppressors, black people around the world, Africa included, needed to be able to take pride in their identity. So he designed a flag that he thought they could rally around. And this was part of a greater goal of promoting the ideology we now call Pan-Africanism. In fact, he was among the original promoters of Pan-Africanism. And each color on this flag has a very particular meaning. Red represents blood, the blood that all people of African ancestry share, and the blood spilled in the name of liberation. Black, of course, represents the people themselves, and green represents the natural wealth of Africa. As you might imagine, this symbolism resonated strongly with many people in Africa. And so these colors, as well as yellow, tend to show up in a lot of African flags usually with basically the same meanings. So what African countries do you think would find good meaning in this symbolism? Well, one of them would be Ghana. When they gained their independence in 1957, Ghana faced the unique challenge of being the first. They had an example to set. What sort of future for Africa did they want to promote? What example were they going to set for the rest of the continent? So the government put out a call for a flag for the country, and it was a well-known Ghanaian artist by the name of Theodosia Oko who submitted the winning design. And this is, as far as I can tell, the first national flag to use all four of the Pan-African colors, taking the influence from Ethiopia and from Garvey, putting them together. Red, yellow, green, black. And that's the first thing you should notice about this flag. It's got all four Pan-African colors. It's also got that black star, which becomes a pretty significant symbol in its own right. So, red, gold, and green, the blood of those who died fighting for independence, the mineral wealth of Ghana, and the natural wealth of Ghana. It's the same meaning that it has in the Pan-African flag. The red and the green mean the same thing. And the black kind of means something similar as well. It was meant to represent the emancipation of the African people and their unity against colonialism. And since then, it's grown to become a sort of a symbol of Ghana and its people. Oh yes, and it was also originally an allusion to the Black Star Line, which was a shipping company founded by Marcus Garvey. So there's this very consciously Pan-African influence in the Ghanaian flag. And the Black Star has become this big Ghanaian symbol. It appears on the Black Star Gate in Black Star Square in Accra. It's the capital of Ghana. The Ghanaian national soccer team are called the Black Stars. And this is how you can tell the flag succeeds as a flag. The symbolism becomes something that Ghanaians all identify as meaning Ghana. Same way that everybody knows that a red sea around a sun means Colorado. And when it's done well, that symbolism can tell you everything you need to know. Or at least the things that the people who designed the flag thought people ought to know. If you want an example of this, we'll just ask Mozambique. Mozambique's decolonization happened in 1975, 18 years after Ghana, from a different country on the other side of the continent, under very different circumstances, much less peaceful circumstances. There was a decade-long civil war involved. But there's a pretty clear Pan-African influence here, too. So you can see how much influence Ghana's flag design had. Red, yellow, green, black. And we also see something else very interesting. Completely different choices of symbolism. So this raises an important question. What can you tell about a country just by looking at its flag? Every country has a different identity that calls for different symbols. So let's take a look at the flag of Mozambique. What's the first thing that jumps out at you? It's the AK, isn't it? And this whole emblem, in general, is very interesting symbolically. Gold star on red, that's already a left-wing symbol. See that on the flag of China. And then a book, a hoe, and an AK-47. So this is already sending a pretty clear message. In the context of the war to overthrow the Portuguese colonial government that the Mozambicans had just got done fighting, this sort of Marxist symbolism seems to be Frelimo's answer to the question, what is a Mozambican? The book, anti-colonialist revolutionaries at the height of the Cold War, surely there would have been people who'd read Marx, who'd read Lenin, might have even read Fanon, or Mao for that matter. The hoe, most Mozambicans were subsistence farmers then and are subsistence farmers now. In fact, people who would be familiar with the use of a hoe. In a very literal sense, you could call it the means of production. And the AK, well, that was a very common tool of socialist revolutions in Africa, because it's cheap, it's reliable, it's easy to use, and it's made by the Soviets. So, look at the hoe, the book, and the gun. In a very real sense, you could say these are the tools with which Mozambique gained its independence. So, the symbols on Mozambique's flag answer the question of what Mozambique's national identity after colonialism is. In the eyes of Frelimo, at least, the Mozambicans are united by their revolutionary origins as a nation, and that is what they should be proud of. So we've seen here how you can create a coherent national identity where one may not necessarily have existed before. This is something a lot of African countries had to contend with. But what about changing that identity? What does it mean to replace a flag? And what do you do when a flag doesn't adequately represent the people it flies over? To answer that, we need to leave Mozambique, but you only have to go one country to the south. It's time to talk about South Africa. South Africa has a pretty famous flag. If you only know one flag from Sub-Saharan Africa, it's probably this one. And for good reason. It's one of the newer flags in Africa. It was only adopted 30 years ago. It's very recognizable, the 6-color design, quite famous. Most flags have fewer colors than this. Even Mozambique's flag we saw only had 5. But every color on South Africa's flag has a very good reason to be there. Rainbow Nation, rainbow flag. Red, white, and blue from the UK and the Netherlands. Green, black, and yellow, all Pan-African colors. Also, as it happens, the colors used in the flag of the ANC. Not a coincidence. So, this flag is almost a visual metaphor for the end of apartheid, combining the symbolism, combining the symbol that represents, combining the colors that represent the whites with the colors that represent the Africans. It very consciously serves as a representation of bringing the two sides of South Africa together, especially in light of what the apartheid-era flag looked like. Orange, white, and blue, historic Dutch colors, and we also see the Union Jack, the flag of the Orange Free State in the middle there, and on the right is the flag of Transvaal. So this flag is like 3/4 Boer. And African symbolism is nowhere to be found. This sends a very clear message. The Afrikaners are the ones in charge. This is their country. So in light of this, it's really no wonder that the ANC decided to throw out this flag and introduce a new one in 1994. And there's also the simple matter that, well, it's not a very good flag. The choice of symbols on the apartheid-era flag is, speaking strictly from a graphic design standpoint, not very well executed. Modern guidelines on flag design, like those published by NAVA, North American Vexillological Association, advise that flags should be kept simple, as well as that they should employ meaningful symbolism without, and this is key, without duplicating other flags. And the apartheid flag fails on both these counts. Not only does it consist entirely of reused flags, it also has them mashed together in this cluster, which is too small to easily distinguish at a distance, and also too complicated to easily reproduce by hand. On the other hand, the modern South African flag is considered to be very well designed, and this can easily be observed in the wild, so to speak, simply by taking note of how often South Africans fly it, like at that picture of the rugby game from a few slides ago. So one could say that South Africa's political change for the better also brought with it a vexillological change for the better. So what's the takeaway from all this? Does trying to shut certain groups of people out of power negatively impact your nation's ability to make a symbolic point about its identity because you're not encompassing the entire identity of the country? Is this the banality of evil in action? Was the National Party just bad at vexillology? It's hard to say for sure. And at least one of those questions is probably beyond the scope of this class. What do you think? What is for sure, however, is that every flag has its own story to tell. Prior to decolonization, colonial flags, especially the British colonial flags, tended only to be differentiated by small seals. This sort of sends a message that each colony is just an arm of a grander whole. They all belong to Britain. They all very much belong to Britain. And so ex-British colonies tended to beg to differ. You'll very often see them add in symbols that are often quite specific, like Kenya's Maasai shield. And incidentally, we also see black, red, green. There's the Pan-African colors again. Indeed, a lot of countries designed pretty consciously Pan-African flags. Guinea-Bissau even used the black star. But then a few others sort of went off in their own directions, like Liberia. And Liberia's flag is no less representative of the country's identity than Guinea-Bissau's is. Because it was, after all, a country founded by freed slaves from America, so it stands to reason that they wanted an American-inspired flag. And there are, of course, dozens of countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, with dozens of flags and dozens of stories to tell. There were some that I actually wanted to do larger case studies on, but this presentation is unreasonably long as it is. Besides, I would have just ended up repeating a lot of the same points over and over, and I don't think that would have made for a very good presentation. But you do see a lot of these things, the 3 stars on Burundi's flag, third from the left there, represent the 3 ethnic groups in the country. Zimbabwe's flag has a I believe a soapstone statuette that was found at the ruins of Great Zimbabwe. Angola uses Marxist symbolism. Every country has its own identity, their own goals they they wanted to achieve. And so their flags all reflect that. Often in the flags of newly decolonized nations, you can see the sort of what the founders of the nation wanted their country to be. So, look at the map of Africa and its flags again. What do you see? What things stand out as important? More importantly, why is what you see important? Think about the challenges that the nations of Africa faced in the decades after decolonization. The goals that they've set out to achieve. Everyone chooses different symbols to represent the things that become their post-colonial identity. So how does a country define itself? This is the real question that I think drives flag design. How does a country define itself to the world outside its borders and to the people within its borders? How does a new nation introduce itself to the world? Every flag in Africa says something different, but I think they also kind of all say the same thing. This is what we are.